Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you're just joining me for the first time, my name is Ursula. I'm an indie author of historical fiction. I primarily do booktube and authortube related content, and I also do a great deal of Dantean posts on account of this being his 700th death anniversary, and today I'll be doing a vlog form of a blog post, which I wrote for this year's blogging from A to Z April, which my theme was Dante and the Divine Comedy, and for the letter W, I did The Wood of the Self-Murderers, which is the name of an artwork, I believe a watercolor by the British artist William Blake, and I'll be talking a little bit about the artwork, art history with it, and it's also based on Canto XIII of Inferno, so I'll be discussing that a bit as well, obviously, and also it references something which was in the Aeneid, which I'll also be reading from. So let's get down to it. English artist William Blake created this artwork called The Wood of the Self-Murderers, the Harpies and the Suicides, between about 1824 and 1827, using ink, watercolor, and pencil. It's part of a series which ended up as Blake's final watercolor set before his August 1827 death, and I believe he did 100 watercolors on this, all based on the Divine Comedy. Some of them are complete, some of them are unfinished. They're all in various states of like being finished or not, but I believe they're one among the best known artworks illustrating the Divine Comedy. I also did a blog post about like spotlighting a number of artists who illustrated it. Perhaps I'll do that in future as well as a vlog. So in 1824, Blake's painter friend John Linnell, who lived from 1792 until 1882, commissioned him to create a series of paintings based on the Divine Comedy. According to legend, Blake, who was then in his late 60s, he easily churned out 100 watercolor drafts during a fortnight's illness in bed. Most had no colors, and only 7 were gilded. In March 1918, Linnell's estate sold this artwork for £7,665 through Christie's to the British National Art Collections Fund. A year later, they gave it to London's Tate Gallery, where it's been on display ever since. And I also read Blake used some of his final shillings he owned in his entire savings to buy pencils to do this artwork. It was so important and special to him. He was a fellow Dante file, and many other artists throughout history have also been inspired by love by Dante to create artworks based on his book, and just basically about him in general, not just in the books he wrote too. So the scene depicted comes from Canto XIII of Inferno, in the second ring of the seventh circle of hell. The seventh circle contains people guilty of various kinds of violence, including things most modern people wouldn't consider violence at all, like suicide and gay male relationships, which I previously addressed in a previous vlog and blog posts. But in the Middle Ages, suicide was considered not only a sin, but an even greater act of violence than murder, since it involved a rejection of the gift of life. Even into the 20th century, many jurisdictions had laws against suicide, and people caught attempting suicide could be sent to jail and were treated like terrible, immoral criminals. And if you're familiar with classic films, this does come up not, I wouldn't say super often or fairly often, but every so often you will see oh, this person was trying to kill himself or herself. You better not let anyone find out, because they would report it to the police and this person would be arrested, instead of giving them the treatment they deserve for the mental illness or depression or whatever they're going through that led them to that terrible moment. Thankfully, today we have a much more compassionate, scientific understanding of depression and mental health issues, and many helplines and organizations devoted to preventing suicide and providing counseling. The darkest night of the soul shouldn't last forever, and I did have at the end of the blog post a link to resources and helplines, which I'll also be linking to in the description box down below, and also I'll try to insert a screen at the end showing the URLs and the phone numbers if you are, God forbid, are thinking about this, or someone you know is, because it's definitely important to get help for this, particularly around the holiday season. This shouldn't be a time of year you're thinking of doing the unthinkable. So this forest is haunted by harpies, who are half-human, half-bird creatures. In Dante's imagining, they eat the leaves of oak trees in which suicides are entombed. The poor souls are condemned to an eternity of being preyed on by harpies in a zombie-like existence. They also can only speak and mourn when their trees are damaged or broken as punishment for expressing grief through suicide. To rub even more salt into their wounds, the souls of these suicides are also not even allowed to return to their physical bodies after Judgment Day. Instead, they must hang their bodies on the trees as an eternal reminder of what they denied themselves and how they denied their bodies in their final act of mortal life. In Blake's artwork, Dante and Virgil are walking through the forest when Dante rips a twig from a bleeding tree and hears the words, Why are you tearing me? Just prior to this, Virgil warned him that if Dante breaks off any twigs, what you are thinking now will break off too. But Dante was intrigued by all the phantom wailing and had to get to the bottom of it. And by the way, this is all from the Mark Musa translation, which was the main translation. At the time, I now have added a number more to my collection, and hopefully, God willing, will be adding a number more also in future. I hope to have a full Dante shelf eventually. The blood then turns dark around the wound, and the voice continues, "Why do you rip me? Have you no sense of pity whatsoever? Men were we once, now we are changed to scrub. But even if we had been souls of serpents, your hand should have shown more pity than it did." Dante drops it in shock and horror upon hearing this, and Virgil placates the suicide by saying Dante wouldn't have done it if he'd let himself believe what he, Virgil, once wrote. But the truth itself was so incredible, I urged him on to do the thing that grieves me, and this is something which was in Book 3 of the Aeneid, starting at line 22. This is the Robert Fagel's translation. "Now, making offerings to my mother, Dione's daughter, and to the gods who bless new ventures, I was poised, there on the beach, to slaughter a pure white bull, to Jove above all who rules the powers on high. Nearby I chanced on a rise of ground, topped off by thickets, bristling dogwood and myrtle spears. I tried to tear some green shoots from the brush, to make a canopy for the altar with leafy boughs, when a dreadful, ghastly sight, too strange for words, strikes my eyes. Soon as I tear the first stalk from its roots and rip it up from the earth, dark blood oozes out and fouls the soil with filth. Icy shudders rack my limbs, my blood chills with fear. But again I try. I tear at another stubborn stalk. I'll probe this mystery to its hidden roots, and again the dark blood runs from the torn bark. Deeply shaken, I pray to the country nymphs and Father Mars who strides the fields of Thrace. Make the sight a blessing, lift the omen's weight. But now as I pitch at a third stalk, doubling my effort, knees bracing against the sand, struggling to pry it loose, shall I tell you or hold my tongue? I hear it, clearly, a wrenching groan rising up from the deep mound, a cry heaving into the air. Why, Aeneas, why mangle this wretched flesh? Spare the body buried here. Spare your own pure hands, don't stain them. I am no stranger to you. I was born in Troy, and the blood you see is oozing from no tree. Oh, escape from this savage land, I beg you. Flee these grasping shores. I am Polydorus. Here they impaled me. An iron planting of lances covered my body. Now they sprout in stabbing spears. Then I was awestruck, stunned by doubt and dread. My hackles bristled, voice choked in my throat. Dante knew the Aeneid by heart. It's somewhat over 9,000 lines. It was his favorite book. Frequently throughout the Divine Comedy, he'll make reference to it, and sometimes even outright quote entire passages or paraphrase them, or basically just adapt them into barely new words. It was that wonderful and special and influential to him, and I'm very long overdue for a full rereading of the Aeneid. And by the way, that's not even my own copy. I've been definitely borrowing it from my father, but I do intend to get around to rereading it hopefully soon. So, Virgil then asks the suicide to identify himself so Dante might make amends. The suicide is Pietro della Vigna, sometimes called Pier della Vigna, and other variations of his name. They weren't quite, so consistent with names being one specific thing throughout the Middle Ages, either in, spelling or form or pronunciation. He lived from 1190 through 1249, and he was a jurist, diplomat, scholar, legislative reformer, proponent of science and the arts, and a chancellor, secretary, close advisor to Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. Other people at court, jealous of his success, falsely accused him of being an agent of the Pope and richer than the Emperor. Pietro was thrown in prison and had his eyes ripped out. Pietro, who killed himself by banging his head against a wall, is presented as a heroic suicide. However, some historians believe he was truly tortured to death or died because of the binding, and obviously during the Middle Ages they didn't always necessarily keep the greatest or the most accurate records. A lot of it is, kind of game of telephone. Many things we might never know for sure about these people because we just don't have the kind of mandatory or extensive documentation we do today about how people live and the specifics of and circumstances of deaths and births and things like that. But that's kind of where you can play around if you're writing historical fiction or alternative history, because you can fill in these gaps to a certain extent because there are certain things we might never know, so we can just use our imagination and guess what they might have like done or seen or believed, like for example. And I'll be inserting at the end a painting called The Court of Emperor Frederick II in Palermo by Arthur von Romberg, which was done in 1865. Obviously, I don't think I know which one would be Pietro della Vigna in that picture, but I'm pretty sure he would be there because he was such a prominent, wonderful person in the court. And now I will be inserting the slide with resources. If God forbid you were considering the unthinkable, you should definitely get help for this. You shouldn't, do the thing that you cannot never undo. The darkest night of the soul should never last forever. And this is, a lot of people might think, oh, he was like saying, oh, you're going to hell if you commit suicide. You have to look at the deeper thing about what's actually going on there. He's not like saying these people are terrible people because they, gave in to depression or what have you. You just need to like learn to study with like an outside partner and extra textual sources and things like that. And don't just simplistically say, oh, he condemned suicide because people in the Middle Ages were terrible or whatever. So if you've listened to the end, thank you very much. I will possibly, my next video will finally be the It Cannot Be Books tag. Nobody tagged me in it, but I thought it was interesting and I would like to try doing it. And I'll also possibly have some more book review posts coming up, particularly in the new year. I'm looking forward to doing The Play of God by Devi Van Amali and some more Dantean posts also in future. And so please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. I'm really looking forward to building my channel so I can finally have more relationship with other booktubers and author tubes. I can't really do that if barely anybody is watching or commenting on my videos. So see you very soon. Thanks. Bye.